I'm joined today by a very good friend, Nathan Davidson, who is the Vice President of Managed Services from 5-Star Technologies. And today we're going to be talking to you about how to select the right Chromebook within your school district that's going to serve your ecosystem the best. We want to make sure that by the end of this webinar, you're going to walk away with some helpful tips and some insightful wisdom that you need to make informed decisions as you seek to select the right Chromebook. Because as we know, the Chromebook market has shifted dramatically in the past 6 years. I worked in school district IT prior to this position, right when the one-to-one deployment was hitting. And at that point, it was a Chromebook is a Chromebook is a Chromebook. You had one clamshell model that you could get from maybe 2 or 3 different manufacturers. There weren't many bells or whistles or glitz or glam to it. It was a Chromebook and it served one function. And in the time since, things have shifted dramatically. So what we're going to really be focusing on today is the different types of Chromebooks that are out there, how you can go about actually making that right decision. But to sort of help us, I would like to kind of know what brings you here today. What phase are you in? Are you in the exploring phase, meaning you really don't even know where to start? You've heard about Chromebooks. Obviously, everybody's heard about them, but you're not currently using them. You don't use the Google ecosystem, or you're not using devices in the classroom quite yet. Or are you in the considering phase where you're here to find out about different devices? You may already have some, you want to change devices, you want to upgrade, or are you in the planning stages? You're currently moving forward on a plan, and you're here to confirm your solution or your decision. So a quick survey just popped up for you. If you could take a second, just click kind of where you're at. That's going to help us tailor a little bit more of our conversation as we move forward here.
Awesome. So it looks like we have a little bit of everybody in each phase. We have about 14% exploring, 29% considering, and 57% planning.
Wow, that's a really good spread there. So what we're going to dive into now, and this may be redundant for some of you who are already in the planning stages, but for those of you who are in the exploring stages, I want to take a minute to talk about why Chromebooks. What would make you choose a Chromebook over a Windows device, or what's going to be the benefit to it? So with that, I want to kind of hand it off here to Nathan to talk to us a little bit more about why you would choose a Chromebook in your ecosystem.
Hey, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. Good to be with you all today. This is such a fun topic, and it's great to have that data to know exactly where you all are at, and it's interesting that there's a majority of you in that planning phase. This question, why Chromebooks, actually gets me a little bit nostalgic to almost going back to why Chromebooks were built and created in the first place. My experiences have been, I started in K-12 in 1996, and I was a technology coordinator at that time, and really green. Brand new into K-12, into teaching and supporting environments. And as I evolved through my career, it became clear that access was important, right? Which is why we're into, what we call one-to-one. And however, there were so many barriers that existed, and everybody, we tried to take this device and fit it into education. We still do that, but Google created something so unique by actually trying to solve the problems that existed within K-12 education, and thus created the Chromebook. And we're actually going to hit a lot of those. So when we look at data that tells us, well, what might be some of the benefits of Chromebooks, this slide reveals actually many of those. And I'm a former classroom teacher, by the way. I said I was a technology coordinator to start, but I actually planned to teach social studies, had trouble finding a job there, but really got into computers, and eventually became a technology coordinator. And that evolved into actually teaching teachers as, we call a technology integration specialist these days. And these barriers that you see listed here, that Chromebooks solve are very, very prevalent in the classroom. My focus on this slide is really the last two. When I think about, I heard teachers comment about, boy, it takes this device so long to just boot up or to reboot. Chromebooks, decrease that time by 73% because they boot up, in 8 seconds. The maintenance for a technology department is also significant because updating Chromebooks is so easy to do, where you're just simply updating the operating system. It's easier to push and distribute apps to it. So it really helps a tech department with maintenance, which means better uptime is better experience in the classroom, right? So this data is actually pretty telling to know, hey, if you're going to implement Chromebooks, or you already have, hopefully you find that this data is significant to you. So when you look at those data points, it may sound, hey, this is great. So how do I know what to buy? How do I buy right, and what do I need to consider?
Nathan, can you go back one slide for a second? I kind of want to touch on a point that you talked about, the very last one, less time spent on maintenance. And that's not just physically like repairing the devices, it's maintenance, just keeping them up and running, and what your department is focusing a lot of their time on. If you're running Windows devices, which are great, but having been in that IT world for a school district, the second you have multiple different styles of devices out there, even within the same brand or within the same model, you have to have multiple different images, and you have to keep all of that stuff up to date. So suddenly if a new update comes out and you've got 7 or 8 different images, you have to update that. Then you have to go and locate those or push those out via group policy. Whereas Chromebooks just do it automatically. It's basically a set and forget type situation where you roll them out and then they just automatically update themselves. So it's less for you as a user and as an IT department to physically have to worry about. So you don't have to spend your time out there in the field updating or modifying images. So that's a huge component to it, because a lot of the IT departments are already pretty spread thin as it is.
Yeah, those are great points, Eric. And I wish I had a P word that went along with that, right? To technically support your environment. It's a critical element. And anybody that can standardize their environment certainly saves on that time. And there's so many options out there that streamlining absolutely helps with technical support. Those are great points. Since I don't have a P for that, I do have these other 3 Ps to go along with that support piece, which is cost. One of the problems that Chromebooks solved in the past and still solves today is the price point. And these are rough estimates, by the way. So you can go lower than $300, and certainly you can exceed $500. But we're considering for students, that's probably a pretty safe range, right? Which is what you're going to consider. But yeah, and we'll talk about this later as well. But when we look at Chromebooks for teachers, that's a whole new avenue that hasn't been considered as often, but we're starting to see spring up more, which is what devices are available for teachers. And that's kind of, again, a rough estimate at a price point. And what goes into that, a big part of that's the performance. So when you look at the processing power, probably many of you are familiar with Intel processors, right? So when you start getting into a Celeron or maybe even an AMD processor like that, those are going to probably give you a lower cost. But when you look at hey, I need a little more horsepower, I need maybe an i3 or an i5 or an i7 processor, you might have to look at that. First iterations of Chromebooks came out with some of them, the early phases had 2 gigs of RAM, and then 4 kind of became the baseline. As Eric mentioned earlier, there's so many different devices out there. You not only have to look at what the manufacturer is and the model, but also what's under the hood. And that's really where this comes into
so
play.
There's a really neat website I'm going to paste into the chat here. When I would do demos with my customers, I would take out 4 or 5 different Chromebooks and show them varying degrees of processing power, because as you mentioned with price, for the longest time, there was this race to the bottom, and people just wanted the cheapest Chromebook they could possibly get, not realizing that by getting the lowest cost, what are you sacrificing for that? So to show customers, hey, yes, this is a $200 Chromebook, but here's how it performs compared to a $500 Chromebook. So there's a really neat website It's a Fishbowl HTML5 graphics benchmark. And what you do is you bring this up, and then you can choose how many different fish to put in there. And if you go up to like 2,000 fish, it can really bog your computer down. And those processors, the Chromebooks that had the really low end processor and the 199, like they would lock up or they would just really bog down. So it's a very simple visual graphic for, hey, here's how this device functions. So imagine instead of those being fish, there are different browser tabs that are open. How many tabs can you have open? How much horsepower do you have to be able to do the things that you want to do? And with a lot of curriculum being pushed online, how many different things are students doing at once? So that's one really major considering factor. Is a lot of people tend to get really hung up on price, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that. What are you willing to sacrifice for that price?
Well, yeah, Eric, it's a great resource. And, to that point, it also leads to frustration in the classroom, right? Hey, how come my device locks up all the time, or it's so slow? And, as a user, and, as we get further into, a digital age, I mean, we're talking about, web 3.0 and some really, the metaverse and, and some really far out there things, the demands, as you mentioned, Eric, on what the device needs to do are going to be really significant. And every user, whether it's a student or a teacher or administrator, needs to have that level of savvy and understanding as to, oh, hey, I can't have an unlimited the number of tabs open because that impacts my performance, right? So,
right.
And that absolutely impacts memory on here, but also storage and thinking about, well, what do I need to actually have, saved locally on my device versus up in the cloud, so to speak.
Which is also another interesting topic too, because when you talk about Windows devices, you need to talk about, well, how much is a storage space? On a Chromebook, it doesn't really matter. They kind of fall into the 16 or 32 gig. On the teacher devices, sometimes they can go up to 64, but most often, and we may be talking about this in later webinar series coming up, but most of the districts that I've worked with, and even the ones that I worked in, it was just set the second that Chromebooks get turned off, it clears everything on the memory. So that's something that you may be willing to sacrifice. If you're looking for that sacrificial lamb to help bring pricing down, storage is one place to really bring something down, because ultimately at the end of the day, you're not really storing anything on your Chromebook. So invest that money into better processor and the 8 gigs of RAM instead of the 4.
Yeah. And so then we think about how important protection is, right? So the question is to case or not to case. My guess is most of you right now, you're having some kind of a case, right? Hey, we all, that's what we see in the many districts that we support. There's pretty much some type of a case, right? Either something, that's in a case where they have to leave it, cased to use, or it's a clamshell or something like that. And we've seen many Chromebooks say, hey, we're ruggedized, right? But what I try and convey the message is, know that means maybe it's a little more durable. It might be able to, if it's uncased and you have a drop from maybe a 4 to a 6 foot, height. Yeah, it might hold up, might have some surface damage, but we don't want to confuse that with indestructible. And,
right.
Military grade used a lot, right, in terminology. And there's certainly, we could unpack that a little bit. But the big message here is, hey, it's, just know that ruggedized, maybe it's more durable in the shell, but it's certainly not indestructible. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that really go into that too. If you look at how many different ratings there are for mil-spec, there's dozens. And as long as you meet one of them, you're technically mil-spec certified. So a lot of companies will really put a heavy emphasis on that. So it just take some time to look into what that means. And the most important ones obviously are going to be the drop test. How high can it be dropped from? Because Chromebooks get knocked off of desks. It just happens. You walk by, bump it, student throws their backpack with it. The other one that's really important too, and a lot of devices actually take into account, is the waterproof keyboards. So if you can dump an entire 30 ounces of water on it, they've got channels to funnel that water away from. You'd be amazed how many devices get things spilled on them. So the drop test, in my opinion, the drop test and then the waterproofing are two of the most important ones you should be looking for. Having the ruggedized edges, sure, but the shock testing is going to be the most important.
Yeah, certainly we could think about some liquids like Coke, and as teachers, there are probably some more unpleasant liquids that we won't name on here too, that aren't very good to have on devices. Eric, I want to focus on the word time. You mentioned the word taking the time, and I want to, as we look at the next slide, to really go maybe to another level. What I've seen repeatedly is, oh, hey, let's go ahead and shift from our current device over to Chromebooks, or we currently have this Chromebook and we want to just move to a different Chromebook, right? Eric, you mentioned earlier that there's so many different flavors, so many different manufacturers that are producing different models of Chromebooks of different sizes and shapes and capacity. But what I find many schools leave out, and I'm thinking about the 59% of you that say you're in the planning phase, is going a little deeper and with some strategies. How do you actually select the right Chromebook versus, hey, spin the wheel and pick one? And I want to unpack a process from a firsthand perspective that I've seen with a district that I've worked with. Is they had a current device. I won't name the device, but they went one-to-one. They had a current device that used by 1,200 students, and they were at a point where, okay, these devices are getting into about year 4. We need to consider a refresh. What should we do? Well, we encourage them first. Hey, let's form a cross-functional team and bring a group together that consists of some teacher leaders and some administrators, and let's have a group that creates a vision and kind of charts the course for what do we want kids to accomplish. The next thing was we wanted to collect data. So we actually sent out a survey to students and asked different questions about their experiences with their current device, but also more about what they wanted to do. We also, when we considered a consistent device ecosystem, we wanted to provide some test devices, which was a couple of sets of Chromebooks, to give teachers and students time for authentic experience rather than just talking generalities about what Chromebooks might solve or what that experience might be like. So we got some devices in their hands, and worked to create a consistent device ecosystem. But then, kind of back to Eric's previous point about support, we also wanted to consider technical support. What's it going to take to support it? Is that going to be a better experience, more efficient, better for our technical staff if we move to Chromebooks, or if we stayed with the current device? So all those things considered, this group actually developed a vision. They collected data. They actually got a use case with those pilot sets, and that all led to a decision to move grades at that point, grades 2 through 12, over to Chromebooks and keep K1 with their previous device. I will tell you this: the year after, we went through a similar process and actually found that the primary teachers, those K1 teachers, actually elected to move to Chromebooks as well. So over a 2-year period, that school district actually moved completely from one device and one OS over to Chromebooks. And I could tell you today that they wouldn't go back, and they've really had a really good experience with that. So,
well, and I think too, also kind of to your point, is that one device might not be the best across all categories. So if you're looking at a K-12 district, from experience, a lot of my accounts down in Arizona here, the K-12 or K2 they used to have iPads or some form of tablet, and they liked that functionality because they wanted students to have that tactile input. They felt like tablets were a better choice within the classroom. But as Apple became harder to work with in an educational setting, or they just discovered, we don't have the budget to support this anymore, and we want to get ourselves into a cohesive ecosystem, what do we do? What are our options? So if you look at Chromebooks, there's really only 3 different styles. You can get your basic clamshell, which is just a laptop. It opens and it shuts. There's some variations within with a couple different, a webcam that could rotate all the way around. The hinge could open all the way, but That's option one, is just your basic clamshell. Then you can have a touchscreen clamshell, meaning it's the same thing, except now the screen is touchscreen. Then the third one is flip touch, meaning it can fold all the way over. So that red one that you see at the top, it can fold all the way over on itself. And once it's open, it's essentially a tablet. And what I discovered was that a lot of districts who were looking to replace tablets or iPads within their K2 or K5 or whatever that spread was, really leaned into the flip touch, because about 6 years ago, Chrome introduced the Play Store on the Chromebooks. So you could essentially use it as a tablet. You could go into the Google Play Store, you could push apps out via the admin console, and essentially you were replacing your iPads with a Chrome tablet. So now you don't have two different ecosystems. You have one, but you still have the exact same functionality. And to be honest, a lot of the apps that they were using on the iOS store were available on the Chrome store. So they really liked being able to have that same style of usage that the students were used to. And then moving forward into like 3 through 8, they would do the basic clamshell. And then touchscreen on a basic clamshell was one of those that people didn't really see the value in, because if you're going to have touchscreen, may as well be able to flip it over. And then high school, it was kind of hit or miss. Either they went Chromebooks or they switched over to Windows. But just knowing that there are those 3 different styles of devices out there, and not feeling like you have to choose one to hit the whole gamut, because one of the big things that I like to do when I talk to customers is start at the end and work backwards and say, what do you want to be able to do in your classroom? If you want your students to be able to walk around with their device and interact and treat it like a tablet, well, then you need a Chromebook that's going to be able to function like a tablet. So let's look at this group, and then let's look at the next group. So those are kind of your different quick high level overview of the different styles of devices that you have and why you might consider one over the other.
Yeah, and Eric, it's great to be able to start there when you know what you want to do. And then you find what those options are. It's great to know that you actually aren't locked into one, particular option if there's something that meets your needs. So those are really good points. I think we've got a couple of questions for the audience now. It's a good time. A lot of information so far. So I'll hand it over to you there.
Yeah. So I have a couple more polls that are one more poll that's going to pop up. What percentage of your device breakdown throughout your entire district is Chromebooks currently? I think once everybody's polled, we should see the results here pop up, or Camille can chime in with her ethereal voice and give us the results.
Yeah, I feel like it's a drum roll moment here.
They're still coming in. Let's see here. All right, it looks like we have 63% of people here, about 50 to 75% of their device breakdown is Chromebooks. And then the rest, the 38%, is 75 to 100% breakdown of Chromebooks.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So we have really high Chromebook adoption rate, which I guess, I don't want to say negates question 2, but for those, so that maybe the people in the 50 to 75%, for you, what barriers exist to reach that 100% Chromebook adoption? Is it you're still in the process of phasing in? Is it that you have a mix of Windows devices for K-12 or for the high school? Are there any barriers that exist? If you just want to take a quick second, type those into the chat. That's going to be a little bit easier than a poll. Be interesting to see where you fall on that. While we're waiting for that, some of the barriers that I've come across in conversations with customers have been, well, Chrome isn't indicative of what our students are going to see once they get out in the real world, or in high school, they've got specific software and programs that they need to have installed on their devices. But the biggest one, as I mentioned, was that we want to be teaching them on a device that's going to be representative of what they're going to be working on in the real world. And I feel like even within the past year or maybe two, that's changed quite a bit, where there's a lot of organizations, like high-end professional organizations, that just live and breathe in a Chrome ecosystem. Their email is all done through Chrome. All of their data storage is on Chrome. All of their documents, sheets, presentations are all done through Chrome. I mean, you guys are, Nathan, at 5 Star, you guys are 100% in the Chrome ecosystem.
Right. Yeah. And Eric, that's honestly, that's a really interesting argument. And we absolutely hear that a lot. I'm kind of back in my, days of working as a technology integration specialist. I would deal with that on the front lines. And what we try to emphasize is conceptual thinking, right? So, hey, it's, when we transition from, Microsoft Office, client-based Microsoft Office to Google Docs, well, it lives in a different spot, but conceptually it's a word processor, right? They have similarities, but also differences. And I think, when we talk about that, this speaks to digital literacy, right? So, what we try and create in users, whether they're students or teachers, is the literacy aspect. So, a small example here is, well, yes, you mentioned, at 5 Star we use Google Meet. Well, we're in Zoom right now. So, two video conferencing platforms, but two different ones, but conceptually they do the same type of thing, right? Just in different ways. Yep. So, yeah, it's just, I think, important for everybody that's, considering a change or, moving from one platform to another, that just address concepts. In fact, I just did it myself with my father-in-law, who's in his mid-70s, and moved him from Windows to a Chromebook because he wanted to check email and do word processing and print labels. And I said, hey, we can do all three of those with a Chromebook. So
yeah, cheap, easy to maintain, and you're not going to have a lot of maintenance issues with it. So, when it comes to selecting the right Chromebook, there's really three. If you want to go to the next slide here, Nathan, there's really three main categories, and Google has put together a really powerful and very useful wayfinding guide. And this kind of helps you as the consumer figure out, okay, where do we land? And based on these three, it really kind of gives you an idea of, all right, where should we focus our efforts? The first one is just straight up basic classroom use. We're going to be web browsing, we're going to do some email, do some workspace, and maybe some assignments and testing. That's been the biggest push. We saw the largest deployment of Chromebooks when state testing went virtual. Everybody wanted to get one-to-one so that they could reduce their overall testing time. That's the biggest thing. And then they discover, wow, Chromebooks are really, really powerful in classrooms. We can do more with this. So now we're going to go to a learning anywhere, especially with the remote and blended learning that we have, that we've experienced over the past 2 years. We need a little bit more of a robust device. Supports multiple browsers and tabs, which this can be tested using that HTML5 fishbowl to really show you how much multitasking you can do on a device. We're going to be doing all this stuff concurrently, and video conferencing. I don't think a lot of people really truly understand how resource intensive video conferencing is. Even just doing a web call with voice is very resource intensive. You turn a camera on it and it immediately just saps all the resources. So if you have that going, plus 4 tabs and a program running, you suddenly need a very powerful device. And then even above and beyond that, advanced use. And this is where we go into higher education, teachers and staff, where they need the most powerful because they can't afford to be lagging. They can't afford to have things not running smoothly. So those are the three different tiers. And Nathan, do you have the link handy for the wayfinding guide that we can paste in there for people?
I do not, but I think between you, Andrew, and Camille, I think we have that. What I will say to speak to this slide too, Eric, that as that that continuum there from basic to learning anywhere to advanced use, my visual goes to also, that's the importance of what we spoke about before in terms of the performance of thinking. Well, that's where the memory of that device and the processor actually come into play. So as you move from basic up to advanced, you're going to need a little more under the hood to make sure that that you're getting the performance that you want based on what you need to run. This is a really informative slide. So I think, a lot of people may not, think as much about that. They think, well, how come it doesn't work as well? Well, it may be because, hey, maybe we didn't really consider what we wanted to use it for enough. So this is a really helpful slide.
Yeah, and to kind of give a real world example, I had a customer here who switched their teachers entirely to Chrome. They wanted to go Chrome across the entire ecosystem. So their initial plan was just, we're going to give the teachers the same Chromebooks that the students have, and said, I don't personally think that's a great idea because the teachers are going to be a lot more intensive with it. How about we do a small pilot? And gave 5 teachers the same device as the student, and gave another 5 teachers a higher end device, larger screen, full 1080, much bigger processor, much more RAM to it, and said, let's reconvene in a month and get some feedback on it. And the teachers that had the same ones as a student, they said, this just won't function. And then the other 5 who had the more robust device, like, this was great. So it was very clear to see that depending on usage really dictates what device you need. And when it comes to technology, the old adage of you get what you pay for is very, very true, especially in the world of Chromebooks.
True, absolutely. Well, I think when we look at, speaking of real world, that real world is within the actual classroom. And Eric, I think we both probably got some perspectives on this, but I know, as a former teacher, you've probably got a good perspective to share, with the power of, how Chromebooks can really help, enrich teaching and,
Right.
And engage students in the classroom. Would you like to, maybe share an example from your experiences?
Real quick, the presentation popped off here. I'm not sure who is sharing their screen, but it's on the.
Yeah, I just saw that. Here we go. We'll get that. We'll get that fixed. Hang in there. There we go. There it is.
Yeah. So sorry, I was focused on that. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, when we look about, the authentic uses and experiences within the classroom, I know you're a former classroom teacher, as myself, and we have some, similar experiences, but, would you want to share a, experience that you have from the classroom in terms of the power of Chromebooks, to help engage?
Believe it or not, Chromebooks weren't a thing when I was teaching. I got out of teaching in 2012, and we didn't have Chromebooks in my classroom at the time. We were still running a Windows mobile lab, which nobody checked out because it didn't work. The Wi-Fi wasn't as robust as it needed to be throughout the school. So I didn't really have a whole lot of experience utilizing that in the classroom. But the experience that I did have was in deploying one-to-one throughout the district that I then went to work for in the IT department, and watching the adoption of those devices and the stuff that the students were able to finally do. There was a huge push to create a more collaborative environment, and watching students be able to collaborate both in a real world setting as well as in a digital setting. Kids love technology. Let's face it. They love being in front of a screen. And when you're able to give them that opportunity to do that in a classroom, but then set it up like as a station. So my wife taught in the district where I work, and she really adopted the devices very quickly. And her whole thing was, I'm creating stations. I want students to have jobs within a group. One person's going to be the note taker, another person's going to be the researcher, and then one person's going to be the organizer. So watching them get together and utilizing their devices, collaborate in this digital environment while also being in a physical space together is fantastic. And then watching the different things you can do with a Chromebook. We had one teacher who was having students do the morning announcements recording on their Chromebook. So they would use one as a teleprompter and then another one to physically record it using a rotating camera. So the power is definitely there, and there's almost infinite creativity in what you can do to utilize these devices to facilitate learning within your classroom.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic example. And, I used to use the word simply powerful, and thinking about, you maybe think of the, we used to call the 4 C's, right? And focusing on, in particular, creativity and creation and collaboration. The fact that students can, simply think about how they, collaborate differently just by, starting a document or working on, something in Google Slides and sharing that, but not just doing that within the classroom, but that can do that outside of the classroom as well, which is just completely different. It's the conversation from send me this document and I'll work on it to share it with me, right? And just even those, that something that sounds so simple is just really, really powerful in what it unlocks, to your point, in the classroom, for sure. Which speaks to how on the next slide, how Chromebooks are really just a completely different type of computer in terms of what they do. And I actually use my workstation. I moved from a MacBook to a Pixelbook, and now I actually have a Chromebox as my home office computer. And when we think about how that applies to not only an office but to the classroom, you think about cloud capabilities, right? Eric, you mentioned earlier, there's less need for storage on a device now because that information now lives in the cloud, and I can store all my information there, make it, give it ubiquitous access. And when you look at how that pairs with Workspace for education and all those tools to create documents and sheets and slides and many other things, but also just to simply store other files if you need to, whether it's a Word document or an image or something like that. All that's already at everybody's fingertips. And add in the fact that there are different extensions and applications, and we'll talk about the next layer too, which is Android apps. And Eric, you had mentioned that earlier. Just so many different applications and extensions that can be used for the classroom that add that the same type of capabilities that we would have on a Windows device or a Mac device that actually can be done on a Chromebook. And I left this one in terms of multi-layered security, but the fact that there have been no reported ransomware attacks is pretty significant. I think it's no secret that we're in a day and age that there are people after our data, they're after your data. And K-12 schools have, believe it or not, data that bad actors want. And the heightened level of security that the Chrome environment gives over others is really a powerful and compelling reason to consider that type of an ecosystem. When we talk about those capabilities, and Eric, we talked about the the progression of the devices being able to use for students, but also for teaching as well. And we've had, I know there are a couple of districts that my company works with where teachers have actually moved completely to a Chromebook as the primary device. This is a huge shift, by the way. For those of you here, I'll ask you, well, what's your primary device in your classroom right now? Is it a Windows laptop? Is it a Windows desktop? Is it a MacBook or something like that? It's really interesting how far, and it's not really that far-fetched anymore. If you're thinking, well, for me, I don't know if I could ever use a Chromebook as a primary teaching device. It's amazing how far Chrome OS devices have gone. And this slide really, hits a lot of those. We talked about the productivity and the power and how significant that is. Well, there's a term out there right now. It's high-end Chromebooks. It used to be just Chromebooks. Now there's really high-end Chromebooks. So that signifies the fact that a high-end Chromebook means it's more powerful. It can do more because it can handle more. It can process more. So Eric had mentioned before about, video conferencing and video editing and some other things like that. You can absolutely do those on a Chromebook. It may take, for a better experience, a more productive, more powerful device, but you can absolutely do that. Eric had also touched on the form factor and the flexibility. No longer are there just clamshell devices. They're certainly still out there, and that may be great, especially if you're a student. But if you're a teacher, you may need to have that yoga style Chromebook, something that has touch capabilities, or a USI pen where you actually can have that stylus capability and do some freeform writing or something to that effect.
Well,
Teachers,
and with the stylus too, there's a few different considerations with the stylus too. Some of them are just your basic, you touch the screen and it's detecting that touch physically through the screen, or there's like an actual digitized Wacom stylus that's going to give you that true one-to-one. Like anyone who's used an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil, you can get that same experience on a Chromebook if you get one that has a digitized active stylus too. So that's another consideration.
Yeah, and those Wacom tablets is great that those actually, and they work on a Chromebook, Eric. It used to be only, well, it could only work on a Windows device or a Mac device, so it's really phenomenal. The other things that teachers need are that camera capability, and now it's not just front facing, it's world facing cameras that are now part of those. So hopefully you get the theme here that it's flexibility, and not just from one manufacturer, but a number of different manufacturers that really recognize, hey, there's definitely a market and a need for folks like teachers to be able to use a higher end Chromebook. And again, I mentioned, that's what I use, that Pixelbook. That was a higher end Chromebook. Great experience. So it definitely it's definitely an option. Again, in the right setting, with going through the right process and thinking about, well, what is it that I need to do, and then let that drive it. So really interesting information on that slide. This gets me thinking, Eric, about our next topic, which is getting that crystal ball out, right? This is always fun to do and think about, well, what's next in the future? And we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about, hey, starting with why. What is it you're trying to accomplish? It's a great question. Are you like my father-in-law who just needs to check email and do simple, word processing on Google Docs? That may be lower end, or are you at a stage that you need more? And if you're in a refresh stage, which I believe that there probably are, most of you in the room, you might be at that stage. You've already implemented, right? And now you're thinking about, okay, I need a refresh. So if I need a refresh, first thing is, is it the same make and model? Which honestly, at this point, if you're 3 or 4 years down the line, that's probably not available. But you may look at, well, hey, what's similar to that? But also, are you involving your curriculum department? Are you getting teacher voice? Are you considering the support and bringing somebody from your technology department in to make sure that you're covering all those bases to help you make that right decision? And you also might want to consider, well, if you get your crystal ball out, what do you need users to do in the future? Eric had mentioned, hey, did you know that a Chromebook can not just run web-based applications, it can actually run Android applications. It can actually run what's called Linux applications. You may not be as familiar with that, but I know when I first explored my high-end Chromebook, I knew it could run this, and I wanted to experiment with, can I run Android apps? What's that experience like? Which, by the way, that's gotten much better. Wasn't great before, but it's much better now. But also, I thought, if I really needed to do some video editing, I knew some good Windows applications I could do that on, but what can I do on a Chromebook? And yes, I know there's some web-based options, but what if the web-based option didn't work for you? What if that didn't give you the experience you wanted? So there actually are Linux applications that for all intents and purposes run similarly to a Windows application, but they actually can run on a Chromebook. And if this is something that you eventually explore and you feel like that experience can give you value, those actually do take up space on your Chromebook. And you may need to consider how much storage you have on there. But the future from a student or a teacher user to think, oh, I can run web-based applications, but I can actually do more potentially, is pretty intriguing. And it Eric, it also begs that question too at the end to come full circle. Well, hopefully you all are hearing the message. Chromebooks have come a long way. They've really evolved from a decade ago, which is the first implementation that I had in the school district I was working in, to now that they really can do more than a lot of people think. Now, I'm not suggesting here, hey, everybody goes and, hey, rip out everything you have and just go Chrome. However, I would say that it's worth asking the question. There certainly can be a cost savings that can come as part of that. We've talked certainly about, student usage, and that's probably common for those of you that are in the room. And what would that look like if you moved teachers that direction. So you have teachers and students all using Chromebooks. And now, hey, maybe we get a little more challenging and go, well, what if our building office or our central office actually moved that way? What would that look like? And those certainly, I would go back to the earlier slide, when we talked about, getting a coalition together, a guiding group and collecting data. You certainly would want to do that. But I can tell you, if you ask that question and you really start with, well, what is it that those users need to do? If you ask that question and then you put some time to explore, can we run our student information system, our financial system on a Chromebook? If you start answering those questions, yes, then it may mean that you can consider moving to more fully into a Chrome ecosystem. So
right, and I think there's one other thing that we need to have on here as a consideration as well that I don't believe we've mentioned up to now is the auto update policy. And when Chromebooks first came out, the AUE or auto update end date was typically like 4 to 5 years. And I believe now a lot of new devices that are coming out have an 8-year lifespan, meaning that they will receive updates automatically from Google. Google will guarantee that these devices will work until this date. They'll receive updates. It doesn't mean that after that date, they're going to stop working. It just means that they won't get updates anymore. It's an important factor to consider because a lot of state tests require that you have the latest version of Chrome on your Chromebook if you're going to be testing on a device, because they want to make sure that there's no security vulnerabilities or anything like that. Yeah. So Google actually does have a website that you can go to where you can search any model or any device. So I'm going to paste that in the chat here where you can check the auto update end date for any single device. If you're considering a device that ends in 2 years, that might not be the most pertinent investment just because you're not going to get as much out of it as a device that ends in 2028 or something like that. So that is a huge considering factor that you want to make sure you look at up front instead of worrying about on the back end.
Great resource. And Eric, that resource has actually been really, really helpful for our schools in helping to make those decisions, because they can, they can look and find out exactly when, that certain model of device expires. Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
Wow. We've covered a lot of bases. We've provided a lot of information that we hope is, really been helpful for you. Whether, again, you're in that implementing stage or the stage that you're at, we know over half of you have already, rolled out Chromebooks and implemented those. So probably a great time to pause and find out what, Eric, what questions we have from our audience at this point.
Yeah, if you do have any questions, the QR code will bring you up to some questions you can answer. If you want to drop them into the chat, we'd be more than happy to answer whatever questions you may have. Or if you think that, if you have any other Chrome-based webinar series that you would like to see or that you think would be beneficial, we'd love to hear that, because we're continually planning out more webinar series like this where we can provide additional value, insight, resources, basically just conversation to help you learn more and gain more knowledge in your path forward. So I don't see anything trickling in here, but if you do have anything, you can certainly reach out to us or submit your questions via that QR code. But we do have some webinar series coming up here. If you want to click over to the next slide, Nathan. Coming up on February 16th, we have, as we briefly mentioned, top 3 Google Admin Console settings that you need to check. For those of you who are already within the Google Admin Console, it's overwhelming. And even in the past few years from when I've left the IT world to now, there's so many more different policies that you can put on. It's incredibly, incredibly robust. So we're going to go through, we'll show you a bunch, but we're going to show you the top 3 settings just to check to help make your life easier. And then beyond that, to kind of grow on that, February 23rd, we're going to go an even deeper dive, insider tips to advance your Google admin skills. How do you make the most out of your time and effectiveness within Google Admin Console? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you all very, very much for your time. Genuinely appreciate you joining us today. And hopefully you have walked away learning something new and gained a little bit more clarity and insight as to where you want to go, or perhaps your decision has been solidified. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us or your own dedicated Bluum rep. We would be happy to help. Hope you all have a great day.